The next couple of slides are going to talk about how we do it, the process of government, listening, planning, budgeting, and implementing. The first part, listening, has a couple of components to it. The first one is we conducted a community survey. Every home got the survey and had the opportunity to give us feedback. This is a best practice that is used in local governments as a satisfaction survey. So we ask, how are we doing? And the intent is to identify those things that maybe we are not doing as well, so we can focus on those areas, focus resources on them, and improve how we're doing. One of the things that this particular survey has is a very low margin of error. So the margin of error is a correlation to how accurate the survey is. The lower the number, the more accurate the survey is. And, a 5% plus or minus means that if you had a score of 70, it could actually be a 75 or a 65. That's the margin around that number. In our case, it's 2.1. And so we're very pleased with that. Our response rate was very good on that. The second tool that we've been using is the Bear Valley Exchange. And that is a website for you, www.thebvexchange.com. And this is a tool we've begun using to improve our communications with the residents, gives the residents an opportunity to give us feedback on specific topics. It's interactive, so we can answer questions that we get. It allows you to go online and find out status of a particular project, how are we doing, and certainly there's a lot of information available about a particular project. And there is a lot of information about this particular tax measure or tax measures. One of the things it also provides us is the opportunity to do some polls or surveys. We've used this a couple of times this year already, where we had an after action survey for the range fire so that we could learn almost in real time any issues that people might identify for us. The other one we did, we sent out a postcard to all of our residents at every home on this special police and gate tax. So we had a survey asking you about those services and about some tax levels that we had talked about with the board of directors. This is actually the front page of our strategic plan. And one of the things that we did, besides outlining what we do and our mission and our vision, we had 4 focus areas: responsible stewardship of public funds, effective infrastructure and asset management, operational excellence, and community safety. So they had looked at to say these are important to our community. That was a couple of half days of facilitated meetings with the board and the senior staff. And we had someone who does facilitation as a living, a consultant, to come in and help us arrive at these plans. These are the next couple of pages from our strategic plan. And you'll see up there that they have those focus areas, but they also have objectives. That stewardship, there are 2 ways of trying to achieve that: financial stability and sustainability, or reducing costs and improving non-tax revenue streams. Below those objectives, in each of those focus areas are action items. So these identify specific actions, i.e. tasks or projects, that when we complete them will further the particular focus area and overall improve what we're doing for you. That plan is available online for those who'd like to take a closer look. Once we've done the planning, we then look to budget, because not every action item can be implemented at the same time. So there is prioritization that occurs. We start our process in March when we identify the revenues that we have so that we know how many expenditures we can have. We work with our departments to identify the budget requests, their capital needs. And then early in the process, we have a public hearing before the board of directors that gives the residents an opportunity to share with the board items that they think might be important for us to include in a budget. After we've included whatever that may be and taken a look at some changes and continued to develop the budget, we bring it before our finance committee. We have 4 advisory committees for the CSD that make recommendations to the board of directors. Those committees are made up of 2 members from the board and 3 members from the public. They are the Finance Committee, Administration Committee, Infrastructure Committee, and Public Safety Committee. So they can give us some further ideas or recommendations. We continue to develop the budget, and then we have a budget study session looking over that budget and going and explaining what is in it with our board of directors. After we've prepared a preliminary budget, we again bring it to the Finance Committee for their review and recommendations to the board. And then lastly, we have a public hearing in June. Our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30. So we look to have the budget process completed before July 1. Significance of this for you is there are 5 opportunities for the public to interact with the board and be a part of the budgeting process. Now that we've budgeted items, then we go about implementing. This is a graph, or I'm sorry, just a page that shows what we have completed. So all of the items here were identified in the strategic plan, then budgeted for, and then we completed them. So just some highlights. Under responsible stewardship of public funds, we have long-term financial planning and policies. We have a 20-year capital improvement plan for all funds. And by that, I'm going to go into it later. We have 5 significant funds for the CSD. Community safety, we had the CAL FIRE fuel reduction grant that removed dead and diseased trees from private property. And that was a $1 million grant that we administered. We've recently received a second $1 million grant to continue that program, which not only assists those private property owners with the costs of removing these trees, but it helps our community by getting rid of dead trees that could be fuel for a wildfire situation. Another one there is the emergency generators to sustain water supply. So this was a big project for us, really spurred on by the public safety power shutoffs that we started experiencing back in about 2019. We installed 11 permanent backup generators to help ensure our water supply during any PSPS or other outage, snowstorms as an example. Whatever that is, any extended outage now, we should be able to then provide water to all our residents. That's particularly important for those that are at the highest elevation served by pneumatic generators, because they run out of water in about 2 hours and they have to go through the boil notice and boil process as a result. So we have generators in the valley, and maybe most significantly, we have generators out in Cummings Valley for our wells there that provide a lot of water to us. Under effective infrastructure and asset management, we just completed a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which addresses our property here at the corner of Lower Valley Road, South Lower Valley Road, and Cummings. I'm sorry, Cumberland. Anyway, it handles our office, the public works area, and the transfer station site here gets treated and then is environmentally ready to go back into the environment. The second item here, rehabilitate wells number 31 and 32. We have a number of wells that have been off for many years. In this case, we went in and cleaned these wells and re-equipped them. And because of that, we are getting some better production out of those wells than we had. And it reduces our dependence on our Cummings Valley water district, which that's where we get the bulk of our water. But our plan is to continue to rehabilitate wells so that we're less dependent on them. Not only are we less dependent and more self-sufficient, but we have to spend money, $400 per acre foot, to purchase the water through the district, and then to pump it up into the valley where we can distribute it to our properties. So it's not only good to be self-sufficient, but it saves us money. Under operational excellence, one of the things we're proud of is that we did complete the Bear Valley Exchange engagement website. We also achieved the District Transparency Certificate of Excellence. And that is a recognition that the way that we operate here is transparent, and that's through an outside third party. And they take a look at many of our policies and how we conduct our business before they can award that certificate. So the next section of why are we here has a number of different items. I'm going to start with what is called the Statler Report. Back in about 10 years ago, in 2012, the Board of Directors commissioned a study by a gentleman named Bill Statler, who is a gentleman with at the time over 30 years of local government experience, and who consulted with local governments on a number of different kinds of projects. For us, it was to take a look at the general fund and to do an analysis that took into account our situation, the various revenues and expenditures, and to make a projection going out 5 years. I'm going to read these quotes. The challenge facing the district is that key revenues are flat by design. This means an ever-widening gap, even with strong cost containment. The root of this mismatch, revenues to expenses, lies in the fact that two key revenues, the police and gate special tax revenues, have no organic ability to grow over time, even modestly. The report suggests that without corrective action, the district is facing an annual gap of about 160,000 next fiscal year, which was 2013-14, which grows to about 250,000 by 2017-18. And the report is on our website. So if you're interested in reading the entire report, it is available for you. It also said at some point the district may want to consider asking its voters for a special tax increase. As part of this, the district should strongly consider including a modest provision for annual increases. So, in 2016, the Board of Directors put Measure G on the ballot. It failed. It had looked to increase the police special tax from the $80 that it was to $247 with an annual cost of living adjustment not to exceed 3%. As provided for by the board's resolution. After Measure G failed, the board made cuts. They cut 6 police department positions, including a senior position, 2 officers, and some reserve positions, and a technician position. They eliminated our local dispatch. We now contract with Kern County for that. And they eliminated the post office. The services that were cut helped to stabilize the general fund. So in 2018, the board began to address utility funds and their condition. I want to touch on this a little bit because it's a significant part of our finances, which is that we maintain reserve funds for each of our funds. We have 5 that are the significant ones. The general fund, which is really what we're talking about here. We also have a separate fund for the roads and for the water and for the wastewater and for solid waste, our transfer station and refuse. And each of them has a reserve fund, which is essentially the savings account for those funds. The intent of having a reserve fund, and it's pretty much universal in local government to have reserve funds, are to have some availability of funding in the event of catastrophic events, natural disasters, or economic turndowns. To the extent there's excess from the minimums, we can use that for capital improvements or asset replacements. One of the things that comes into play with catastrophic or natural disasters, if it were declared and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, were to come to help, they reimburse you, meaning a building got knocked down, you have to put it back up before they'll reimburse you from the federal government. So having reserve funds for each of those funds is important. They vary a little bit, and we can talk about that. So in 2018 and then 19, the board dealt with the water fund. It had not had an adjustment for 11 years. What you see on this graph is that the reserve requirement, which for that fund is 25% of the operating budget, which should be held, not expended, is the blue line. The fund balance, as you can see, began to dip below that reserve level in about 2015. It rose above it slightly, but then again in around 2016 or 17 began to drop and continued to drop. After the water rate study and adjustment, the board undertook the wastewater fund. It had not had a rate adjustment for 12 years. And as you can see, the fund balance was adequate until somewhere in around 2017, in which time it declined and literally got down to 0. The solid waste fund, similar situation, 14 years without a rate adjustment. The fund balance dropped below the reserve requirement, and all those requirements have been set by the board of directors. Historically, they've been the same, I think, for many, many years. But the point is that the fund balance dropped below the reserves for the solid waste fund as well. So this kind of shows the actions of the board of directors to address financial issues. And we've included now the 2019 water rate study and adjustment, the 2020 sewer rate study and adjustment, and then the 2021 solid waste study and rate adjustment. Let me just mention, because I think I failed, but that the water fund minimum reserve is 25%. Solid waste is 20% of the operating budget. The sewer fund is 20%. The road fund is 40%, and the general fund is 50%. And I note that because the roads fund and the general fund are funded by either the roads assessment that gets paid with your property taxes, or for the general fund, our major source of revenue is property tax. And we only get revenues that way twice a year. So when our fiscal year begins in July and we don't receive our first tax payment back from the county that you've paid, we essentially are running on our reserves until December, and then again running on them until we get our second installment from the county. This slide here, though, shows that with the rate increases that were approved for those, the wastewater or the solid waste or the water enterprise, our funds are beginning to recover. Those studies were done with three main focuses. The first was that the rates needed to cover our operating costs. In addition to that, the district hadn't budgeted much for capital. So we had been able to include some capital for those funds so we can get some of our equipment replaced or some of the system components replaced. And the third piece was to build the reserve fund back to the minimum level that was established by the board. So following the completion of the utility rate adjustments, the board took a look at the general fund. So beginning of the year, we did a general fund analysis, and we did it a little bit different than the utility rates because per Proposition 218, we can only project out 5 years on utilities. For this one, we went out 20 years, and I prefer doing that because the ups and downs that can occur in our finances are better identified if you can do a longer term analysis. In this case, the picture on your right is just a glimpse of a page that talks about where we'll be in the future. For starters, we took the general fund revenues and projected them out 20 years with some indexing of the property tax or indexing of some of the other miscellaneous, but not the gate tax revenue or the police tax revenue. And then we took the expenditures and extended those out as well. Again, using indexing that had been a part of the modeling since the water rate study. We've used the same template for consistency, and we extended that out 20 years. We also did separate analyses of the police department expenditures and the revenues that were coming in from the police tax. The gate operations analysis, similarly, we took a look at their expenditures going forward and putting some inflationary indexing, not probably more than 2% or 3% on some particular areas. And then the fourth thing here is the 20-year capital improvement plan. This is, I'd say, unique in that a lot of times you may look out 5 years with a capital improvement plan, and that is either projects or equipment, facilities, repairs that exceed about $5,000. That's what defines capital. And we asked each department to identify the future needs out 20 years of what they may need. And examples are, we may need to replace a roof on a building, and that could be either tens of thousands or 100,000, whatever the number is, but we would put it into a cycle so that we could identify it in the future. So we all with this have at least a sense of magnitude of what it costs for operating the CSD, because not only are there roofs and HVAC systems that have a life, and if it falls in that 20-year horizon, we can identify it and hopefully then be prepared to make those expenditures. But we have a lot of rolling stock, heavy equipment. They may have a longer life than 5 years, hopefully, but still at some point when we have to replace them and the item may be $100,000 or $150,000, we'd like, I think, to be able to plan for those expenditures. So the 20-year CIP was included into this general fund analysis for those items that would in the future be funded by the general fund. This is the outcome. The model says that in about 2028, the expenses in the general fund would begin to hit the reserve level and fall below the minimum requirement. And that by 2033, that line would go below zero, so that essentially the general fund has no reserves and would be expending more than its revenues. So with that, the long-term financial analysis gives us somewhat of a wake-up call for the general fund. The initial analysis was presented to the board, and then subsequently, the board gave us some requests of their own to have scenarios run through the model, different levels of funding for the police tax or different levels for the gate tax, anywhere from no police department to fully funding it. We then sent a survey out to every home. That was a survey that went through the exchange, BV Exchange, and asked the survey, or through the survey, asking the residents to give us some feedback. I think, conclusion of the board in putting these amounts, i.e. $500 for the gate or for the police tax and $185 for the gate tax, is intended to have a long-term solution for public safety funding, or to quote, I think from the board, to not kick the can down the road. So this is a look at what that $500 per year tax does in funding our police department. And again, this particular tax has not been adjusted in 26 years. And as you'll see, the blue budget is keeping pace with the tax revenue until we get out 20 years. But I will say that that gap at that point is still minimal. They made one change between the prior special police tax and this current ballot measure, which is the prior tax was for essentially wages and benefits only. And in their discussions of this, the board recognized that there were other operating costs associated with the police department, whether it's equipment or supplies or facilities. Their operating costs, they have contracts for services. Sometimes those things can increase, as does other costs of operation. Think electricity or fuel, etc. This is the special gate tax. This is $185. And again, you'll see that the revenue and the budget are very close, and even out to 20 years, there's just a small gap. This tax was last adjusted 16 years ago, and they made the same sort of an adjustment in the utilization of the tax proceeds to include other operating costs to run the gate operation. One of the things the board was very adamant about was including some accountability measures for you, the public. The first was that there would be an annual third-party audit of the funds by a licensed CPA. And we currently are audited every year, and those reports are on our website for you if you're interested in looking at them. But in this case, there would be a separate audit of each of the tax measure revenues and expenditures. From that information, there's a report to be prepared and presented to the board that details the revenues and expenses and the purposes for those expenditures. In addition, the board included a not to exceed inflationary adjustment of the lesser of 2%. So you recall the measure G failed with a 3%. This is a specific consumer price index to use. And if, as an example, inflation were 4%, the board could, it does not have to, it is optional, but they could adjust the then tax by 2% maximum. If in the case of inflation being at 1% and the board wished to increase the tax, they could only do it by that 1%. So it's the lesser of the CPI or 2%. Lastly, this is a part of the process already, but I think it is an important piece of accountability as well. The board, and now with the passage of those, if the two of them pass or either one of them passes, the board will get the information before setting the tax level, and they'll do that at a public meeting. They currently do that, and they've been doing it for either 16 or 26 years at the current $80 or $75. It's not a necessarily long discussion because those amounts are at the levels they're at. But in the future, when we project budgets and we bring those to the board, they can do an adjustment if they wished, even lower than what had been authorized. So they could reduce the tax below 500 if they wish to, or below 185. If they wish to increase it again, wherever they had left off would be the maximum. That's where they'd have to go back to. And my point, I guess, is to say if they hadn't adjusted the tax for 5 years and inflation had been greater than 2%, they can't accumulate those, put them together and have a, let's see, 5 years times 2%, 10% increase. They can't do that. So they can only go back to where they had been before they may have lowered it. So this is the picture if the taxes were to both pass of what a long-term solution for public safety funding looks like, with the green line being our total general revenues, general fund revenues, and the blue below it. And the significance here is that the lines are not converging. They extend out. And so this solution is for decades beyond, and it's beyond even the modeling that we had done. So it is a long-term, and that was the essence of what the board, I think, was looking for when they set the levels, i.e. the comments that we, and just for the record, the 4 of our staff members here with you tonight are all residents as well, that we all would not have to worry about public safety funding again. End paraphrase or end quote. So that was the goal, and that's why those levels are where they're at. And we'll be wrapping up with some questions here before we entertain some of yours, because this may help either answer one that you had and therefore you're good, or just information for you. So I'll go through these really quickly. Is this a new or additional tax? Well, the amounts would replace those other two, so they're kind of built in. And V and W would replace the existing two ballot measures that have been in effect for 16 or 26 years. What's the plan if the tax isn't approved? Well, the board will need to reflect on the election results and have some discussions about it. Again, those will be public, but there is no way to speculate at this point of what might happen. Will this fully fund the police and gate? And the answer is yes. And long term, as I indicated, for decades. Will we have to raise these taxes again in a few years? No, we won't. How many votes are needed for these to pass? These special taxes require a supermajority under Prop 218, which is a 2/3 vote. So as you can see, 66 and 2/3 to pass. Can the general funds be earmarked for infrastructure? And I think maybe this is referring to what was in the prior slide. Christy, can we go back to the last slide, please? So the green area, if these two measures pass, the blue is essentially our total expenditures for the general fund, while that top green line is the revenues. That green area is about $2 million per year that would be made available for something else. And go ahead, you move back forward. So the point is there could be then about $2 million available. The board will make the decisions on what those funds would be used for. I would add, if the police and the gate were fully funded through the tax measures, there would not be much left to fund in the general fund. And I believe their conversations at the board level would look to use this excess, if you will, or freed up money for infrastructure. So the board is fully aware of the needs for the water system or for roads. We've been working on continuing to plan to improve those areas, and it is the, I guess, purview of the board to ultimately make those decisions. Shouldn't we address infrastructure first? And it says, even if we attacked infrastructure first, the general fund situation would not change. So we would have those lines crossing out there into the future. Are these measures intended to qualify us for a bond? And I've said this in the in-person meetings, but it's an emphatic no. Never has been, neither by myself or the board of directors. This is about public safety. It's public safety. Has property tax income gone up with the new construction? Over the last 5 years, our revenue from property tax has increased about $200,000, which is really made up of new construction or reassessments as a property sells and gets reassessed values under Prop 13, and an annual increase of 2% where it's applicable, again, the maximum allowed under Prop 13. And the day, month, yearly amount of the increase. Well, it's $1.45 per day, $44 per month, or $530 per year increase over what you are currently paying for those two special taxes. So with that, we are done with our presentation. We would like to share with you that we have these resource informations for you, either our website or the bvexchange.com. We also use social media, whether that's Facebook, the Twitter account, or YouTube. And so we look forward to hearing from folks if they have additional questions. Over the last few years, as we were working on our utility rate adjustments, we would put out a frequently asked question flyer to help with questions that we may have received from the public so that we can share the question and share the answers with everyone. So look forward to us posting that kind of a document when we're done with our outreach here, and we may hopefully be able to answer more questions that way.